From the headquarters of Telus, Ecuador's president imposes a sudden 3 p.m. curfew, giving citizens just 30 minutes to return to their homes. Tunisia holds first ever televised debate ahead of presidential runoff. Kenyan athlete makes history, breaking the mythical 2-hour barrier for the marathon. Now from the headquarters of Telus English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. We begin in Ecuador, where the city of Quito has been under strict curfew since 3 p.m. Despite talks about a dialogue, President Moreno has abruptly imposed the curfew for the militarization of the Metropolitan District of Quito, which includes Quito and the municipalities in the surrounding valleys. The president's decision left little more than 30 minutes for the entire city to return to their homes or take shelter elsewhere. The decision was made under the pretext of facilitating the work of security forces dealing with violence on the streets. Today marks the 10th day of massive protests against the economic package decreed by President Lenin Moreno as part of his deal with the IMF. Various social movements, including indigenous, student, and campesinos, have taken to the streets to call on President Lenin Moreno to step down. On Friday afternoon, indigenous movements headed peacefully to the National Assembly in order to try to establish dialogue with the government. But at around 4 p.m. local time, police and military forces violently repressed the protesters that were there, injuring hundreds. On Saturday, protesters from all walks of life also took to the streets surrounding the National Assembly and the Casa de la Cultura. Ecuador's national indigenous organization, CONAI, has decided to hold direct talks with President Lenin Moreno as nationwide protests and strikes against the government's austerity measures continue. In a statement, CONAI said that after consulting with indigenous communities, organizations, and social movements have decided to take up President Moreno's recent invitation for dialogue. The organization said that they demand the withdrawal or at least thorough revision of the austerity measures. They also stressed that while they're open to direct talks, they will not negotiate about any type of compensation. Meanwhile, the mayor of Quito, Jorge Yunda, claims that President Moreno has accepted CONAI and other protesters' demand to revise the decree, which canceled 4 decades of fuel subsidies and introduced other austerity measures.
The president, given the current situation in the country, has agreed to revise Decree 883, and protest leaders will be also presenting their demands in the coming hours, which was also one of their requests. We are worried for Ecuador. Therefore, we call on the city of Quito and the entire country that they cease with the hostility, because there has already been a breakthrough. Decree 883 is going to be analyzed.
Without any justification, Telesur's Spanish signal has been removed from Ecuador cable providers. President of Telesur, Patricia Villegas, announced that the channel had been removed from satellite channel 722 and cable 626 in Ecuador. She denounced the deed and calls on users in Ecuador to demand that operators bring Telesur back to the airwaves. Telesur correspondent spoke to some of the people out demonstrating against the government.
This is tyranny. They are killing us. They are killing our indigenous people. Out with everyone. Out with every millionaire in power. Leave us alone. Leave the indigenous people alone. Because with these hands, we work the land every day for our children, and we feed the country with that. We feed the millionaires, the oil millionaires. Out with everyone. Out with Lenin. Leave us alone.
We heard that our brothers were being killed here, and we got really angry, because being there, we couldn't defend you here. And as brothers and sisters, we said no, we need to unite. Let's go to the presidential palace. If he wants to leave, we'll let him go. But if not, we will take the palace. That's the decision we took. We marched in Puyo and we seized the governor's office, because she also wouldn't listen to us. She never came to speak to us, to tell us what was happening. Never. That's why I say clearly and publicly, I took the governor's office. I went up and came back with the key. I am a Shuar woman, but don't play with me and my people. That's why I'm here. And tomorrow, all my people will be here. And we will shed our blood if we have to.
Nos vamos hasta conseguir We will continue until we achieve our objective, which is the immediate withdrawal of Decree 883. But they are repressing us right now. They're killing us with these weapons. These are 12 bore cartridges. They have a range of 30 to 60 meters. These are not rubber bullets. This is live ammunition which kills people. They are murdering our people. Lenin Moreno is killing his people, obeying the orders of the International Monetary Fund. The IMF is killing the indigenous people of Ecuador and the world.
Medical students have treated some of the protesters injured in the march. Human rights organizations reported on Thursday that 7 people had been killed in the last week of protests and over 500 people injured, 95 of them seriously. But those numbers are rising. The president of Ecuador's National Assembly has announced that the legislative body will in fact meet on Monday, but they'll be meeting in a different province away from Quito. Assembly President Cesar Litardo said that the session will be held in an auditorium at the Peninsula State University of Santa Elena in the Ecuadorian coastal region and far to the south of Quito, where the assembly typically meets, which has been the site of protests. To talk more about the current situation in Quito, we're joined now by our correspondent, Estefania Bravo, who's been on the streets covering events for Telus. Steffi, you were just outside of the National Assembly just before they called curfew. What's it looking like now, or what was it looking like when you departed?
Thank you, Camila. Yes, we have been on the streets for about 3 days now, and the situation is very tense. People were on the streets protesting peacefully, as we have mentioned earlier, and what protesters are asking is that President Lenin Moreno eliminates the executive decree 883 that, as we know, eliminates gasoline subsidies in the country. So people are on the streets, people want to remain on the streets. Despite the violence that has been occurring during these days, we can confirm that 5 people have died because of the police violence on the streets, and yeah, the situation is very tense. The indigenous movements and other social movements have talked about more deaths, but we cannot confirm that yet. We can confirm 5 people that have been dead, many injured, and at least 1,000 people that have been detained illegally.
And you scurried away pretty quickly once you heard about the curfew, I believe, but other people might not have been able to leave or were still trying to hold a demonstration. What do you think happened to some of these other people who were out in the streets at the time that they heard about the curfew?
Yeah, I was able to come back to Telus at around 3 p.m. when the curfew started, but other people stayed there, specifically journalists as well that are covering the events there, and people that are on the streets were looking for shelters everywhere. Universities, the theater, Teatro de la Casa de la Cultura, that is in the north of the country, they are looking for shelters. As we mentioned before, families are there, young children, and they are looking for shelters immediately. And we have to remember also that President Moreno gave this curfew at around 2 p.m. local time and said that it will start at 3 p.m. So people had less than 40 minutes to get to their homes. I talked to 2 people there, and they said that it doesn't matter if a curfew starts, they will remain there, but it is also very dangerous to be there as well because, as we know, police have been very violent.
Absolutely, and one of our colleagues actually just sent us a video which we weren't able to get up just during the show, but it actually shows police circulating with attack dogs, so in residential areas, so people are not able to even walk outside of their houses. We also have seen that now some of the mainstream media internationally is beginning to pick up on these protests here, but they're
after 9 days.
After 9 days, but they're showing only some aspects of it. They're selectively reporting, and I think one of the things that we've seen a lot of is just people, painting this as one single group and not a popular uprising or a popular protest movement. What are some of the groups that you were able to see today?
Yeah, people the main leaders of the strike when it started, of course, was the indigenous movements, but I was there throughout these days and I have seen not only indigenous movements, but students, but mothers with their children, mothers that don't work and work at home, and they were telling me and telling our team, it is not only the indigenous movements, it is a whole city, a whole country that is asking for President Moreno not only to eliminate the decree, but they are also asking him to step down because, as we know, yesterday when we were there, people were protesting peacefully outside of the National Assembly. They were waiting to see if they could have some type of dialogue with a government representative, but the police threw gas canisters at the protesters, and they feel like they have been betrayed by the government. First, they say they want dialogue, and then they are violently repressed. So they don't want to have a conversation with the government. What they want is for him to eliminate that decree. That, as we know, he said that he will review it, and an indigenous leader has said that he is willing to talk with the government. Let's recall also that it is not only the CONAIE that issued the statement, is not the only indigenous movement that is here on the streets. There are various indigenous movements, so we will have to see if the other indigenous movements agree with what the CONAIE has said, that they are willing to talk with President Moreno.
And just before we came on air, we saw it confirmed that Telus had been taken off the airwaves of at least 2 Ecuadorian cable providers. You know Ecuadorian media a little better than I do. What have you seen as far as censorship under this government?
Total censorship, specifically for this. We were on the streets also with the team, and the people that were there were asking us, please, you have to air this because no one else does. They were saying only Telesur does it, neither Teleamazonas, neither Ecuavisa. That is very right-wing media. They were not on the streets. They were not with the people asking them what they felt and what they are demanding. So it came as a shock to us that 30 minutes ago we were taking off 2 main TV senders here in Ecuador, and of course that is also part of the media censorship that we're seeing here in Ecuador and in Latin America. We have said to our viewers and told our viewers that they can watch us online and on Twitter, but it is part of a censorship that it is very hard to fight. You know, of course, social media and they can watch us on YouTube, but this is they are not only censoring, the government is not only censoring the people to peacefully demonstrate, but they are also censoring what the media says. So of course we are still here. As you know, the curfew started at 3 p.m. local time. Right now it is 5:43 p.m. We are here with you and with the team, waiting to see if media can leave the building and if we are able to get to our houses. We still don't know, but we are waiting to see what happens in the future. Absolutely.
The curfew also, it affects our ability to do our jobs.
Yeah.
So if we're not out there and something happens, or anything that happens, even if nothing happens, no one is there covering it out of fear of police repression and censorship. Thank you so much, Estefania. We've been speaking to Steffi, who's been out on the streets covering what's been happening during these Quito protests. We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. In Haiti, the killing of a journalist has fueled fresh protests in the country's capital, Port-au-Prince. Protests erupted a few hours after the reporter who had covered previous anti-government protests was found shot to death in his car. Demonstrators burned tires and spilled oil on the streets of parts of the capital. They're continuing their push for President Jovenel Moise to step down and face prosecution for his alleged crimes of corruption. Haitians have also expressed their disappointment and anger at the continuing U.S. support for the president. It's official. Monday, December 2nd, 2019 is the date that Trinidad and Tobago will vote in local government elections. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced the long-awaited date. The last local election was held in 2016. In a brief statement issued by the Office of the Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley also indicated that the summons of elections will be issued in due course. 8 of the country's 14 municipal corporations are controlled by the ruling PNM party, while the opposition holds the remaining 6 corporations. While opposition leader Camila Persad Bisinsar is urging her rival to bring it on, saying she's confident of a victory at the polls. During her budget response in the parliament, she also challenged the prime minister to call the general election date.
Which this government has for the poor was on full display on Monday when the minister came to this house and threw out crumbs to the most vulnerable persons in our country. That contempt was compounded yesterday by none other than the Honourable Prime Minister, with his sub-story at the spotlight to make excuses for his government's failure to manage the economy since they entered office. Since he cannot do the job, I say don't make excuses, call the elections now.
With just over 2 weeks until Argentinians go to the polls to elect a new president, the incumbent, Mauricio Macri, is making lavish campaign promises to win back support. But many economists say that those promises would be impossible to keep.
The election campaign is in full swing, and anything goes when it comes to promises that could keep you in power.
I heard your message in the primaries, and you were right. I will change whatever needs to be changed to make your daily lives easier. There will be more growth, more jobs, and better wages. The future will be different.
President Mauricio Macri is trying to convince voters of the virtues of this economic model, with new measures that hold out big hopes, but little real possibility for the future.
These are economic measures that are only likely to make the situation worse, or which try to mend with sticking plaster problems that need a much deeper discussion. It's a campaign strategy to try to win over voters who know the country is on the wrong course.
Throughout his first term, President Mauricio Macri has given no answers to workers' demands, nor to the companies that cannot even pay their wage bills. Whatever his promises now, few believe that if he were to win, Macri would change his neoliberal policies.
The underlying problem is unemployment. Poverty is expected to reach 40% in December. It is estimated that 3 million Argentinians suffer hunger, and that's heading for 5 million. The only thing this government has been able to guarantee is its debt payments. And now these are being kicked down the road, putting Argentina on course for a default.
The governing party's campaign is promising to lighten the load on people's pockets and provide easier credit for small and medium-sized companies. But Argentina's recession is getting worse every day, with rocketing inflation and the highest interest rates on the planet.
This is poor electioneering. It doesn't address the big issues in Argentina, something that Alberto Fernandez does. Alberto is not afraid to address big structural issues like taxation. Last week he pointed out that the companies are paying very high taxes, while individuals are not. And this is one of the ways the tax system remains unequal.
With just a few days to go until the presidential elections, the government of Mauricio Macri is leaving the country in a much worse situation than it was when he came to power in 2015. Living conditions have deteriorated sharply, with more poverty, more homelessness, more unemployment, and a big fall in people's purchasing power.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Police in Mozambique are investigating the death of an election observer killed last week. Head of a local election observation mission, Anastasio Matavele, was shot dead on Monday by unknown gunmen who are reported to have fired several shots at his car. He was coming from an election workshop in the Gaza province. This is the latest killing recorded in the run-up to the next week's elections.
Now that we are almost few days from the voting day, so which for us it's a kind of an issue of security when it comes to the observers. So now we're definitely going to have an observation that will not be as free as we wanted, especially because of the level of intimidation that this act created.
Finalists in the Tunisia presidential runoff have taken part in a televised debate ahead of the second round of elections. The debate was the first of its kind to happen in Tunisia's history. It comes a few days after opposition candidate Nabil Kouroui was released from jail, where he had been held since August on money laundering and tax evasion charges.
10 or 15 years ago, these types of debates were viewed on television. We watched them in France and in the United States. Today, young people are attending a debate in the heart of the Arab world, right next to Algeria and Libya, an Arab world full of wars and conflicts.
The United States is to deploy an additional 3,000 troops and 2 squadrons of fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. The move follows last month's attack on Saudi oil facilities, which Washington blamed on Iran. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper has approved the deployment.
Saudi Arabia is a long-standing security partner in the Middle East and has asked for additional support to supplement their own defenses and defend the international rules-based order. In response to continued threats in the region, I've ordered the deployment to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of 2 additional fighter squadrons and supporting personnel, along with additional Patriot and THAAD air and missile defense batteries. Taken together with other deployments I've extended or authorized within the last month, this involves about 3,000 United States forces.
World-renowned opera singer Jessie Norman, who died last week at the age of 74, will be laid to rest this weekend. While she may physically be gone, her legacy is set to live on among South African singers. Our correspondent Matuba Matlaje spoke to South African opera singers who paid tribute to Norman.
Against all odds, Jessie Norman became an opera singer when it was still unpopular to do so for black people. While she was a brilliant artist, she was also an activist, and her work has inspired young opera singers like Luthando Grave, born and raised in South Africa, but currently singing on stages all over the world.
La piccina, 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 la piccina.
He sent this message from Sweden.
Her music and her interpretation of every piece that she sang was unmatched. She was an entertainer and also a perfect interpreter. She was incredible, and my favorite parts were always the German parts. Ariadne of Naxos to me has to be one of the best things she has sung. The Rückert Lieder by Mahler is one of the most beautiful things that I've appreciated about her. The way she carried herself and the way she had strength, you know, to actually go through everything she went through.
Another South African opera singer who's enjoying a successful international career, Huitimang Lehobie, also studies at the University of Michigan in the US. She says she was inspired by the late Jessie Norman.
What an artist she was. She was absolutely amazing. And as a black woman, she was my greatest inspiration. And a lot of my friends here, everybody was just like so drawn into her art and her artistry.
Western classical music is alive and well in South Africa, and there are still artists who keep it alive even under difficult circumstances. They too have sent their condolences to those who knew and loved Jessie Norman.
One marvelous thing about her was her interpretation of music. It was marvelous. Her sound was unique, not imitating anyone.
Jessie Norman is no more, but her indelible mark remains with generations to come of opera singers. Matuba Matlaje, Telus, Pretoria in South Africa.
Kenyan athlete Euclid Kipchoge has made history, breaking the mythical 2-hour barrier for the marathon. With 1 hour, 59 minutes and 40.2 seconds, the 34-year-old Olympic champion became the first ever to run over 42 kilometers race in under 2 hours in Austria. The world marathon record has, for the past 16 years, been contested uniquely between athletes from Kenya and Ethiopia. The two nations are also fierce rivals for distance medals on the track.
From the first kilometers, I was really comfortable. I've been training for it for the last 4.5 months. And above all, like, I actually I've been putting in my heart and my mind that I want to run under 2 hours in marathon to make history and pass a positive thought and a message to the whole world that no human is limited.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telusurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telus English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.